Hello, this is Aaron Elster. The subject of this is judging ethics in an IT setting. The basic gist of this is that ethical dilemmas and ethical choices are different in an IT setting than they would be otherwise, and that it's important to look at the organizations and the systems as a whole where the engineers are working rather than to just point fingers at one or two people when things go wrong. We're going to do this by presenting a Penn State Law Review article, provide a few analogies to an information systems or an IT setting, and then leave you, the listener, free to draw your own conclusions. This is the Law Review article, Why Good Engineers Make Bad Decisions, Some Implications for ADR Professionals, Alternate Dispute Resolution Arbitrators, written by Melvin Bloomberg, an MBA professor at Penn State University. In order for this to work, we're going to have to make a few assumptions here. Basically, we're going to say that your IT guy, your information technology guy, is an engineer, that they serve basically the same purpose and function in their organizations that other engineers do in theirs, and that ethical dilemmas presented in fields of traditional engineering are synonymous in the IT department. First, we'll ask, who is a professional? Who are we talking about here? Basically, it's a person who has lots of training and is an expert in the field that they're working at and is counted on to make important decisions for an organization. They're important because engineers or IT engineers are counted on to be experts in their field and to make they're believed to be able to arrive at the correct answer. And organizations often rely on these people, and often to their detriment. And finally, what are we talking about when we say ethics? And just to clarify some of the vocabulary I'm going to use, for ethics it's just going to be the body of values by which a culture understands and interprets itself with regard to what is good and bad. Ethical choice are going to be the decisions you make when you're weighing what is right and what is wrong. Ethical behavior is simply the outcome of ethical choice. Within ethics, we have a value system here. We have idealism, professionalism, standardization, and routinization. These are the four motivating factors. Idealism is a self-motivator. It's what a person thinks is right and wrong. It's probably the most powerful motivator of these. Professionalism is the motivation you get just from working in your field, from making the decisions, and from the satisfaction you get by impressing your peers. Standardization is adherence to rules and regulations and accreditations that are already in place, and routinization is following the rules that your company makes, or your firm makes, or your organization. The difference is standardization involves standards that the field aspires to, whereas routinization is just following rules within your organization. Following rules, the routinization is probably the easiest thing to do here, and usually there's no blame attached to decisions there, but things change from time to time, and often following the rules can lead to the detriment of the organization. And it's in these settings where engineers often get creative and sometimes make very bad decisions. So usually people point to one or two quote-unquote bad guys when things go wrong, but it's usually not that easy. Oftentimes the causes are systemic, rooted in the organization rather than individual. For instance, when we see DWP workers standing around, we don't blame the DWP workers for standing around, we blame the DWP for being inefficient, the organization over the individual, and often that's true for ethical choices as well. We should also point out that engineers face specific and particular pressures. These pressures come from the importance they play in the organization, the expertise attached to them, and what's expected of them comes from deep within themselves, from their job, from their bosses, and also from the pressure to do well within the organization and to serve the organization's needs. So we can see that engineers have a great deal of pressure on them, and we're going to look at one pertinent example of where that pressure came to a boiling point. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds into its flight, leading to the deaths of its 7 crew members. The disaster was attributed to the failure of an O-ring seal in its rocket booster after liftoff. The decision in question here was whether to launch. NASA had scheduled a launch for that morning at 9:38 a.m. The engineers were concerned that due to the temperature at launch that the rubber O-rings would not seal properly. If this were to happen, there would be catastrophic failure. The O-rings are part of the solid rocket booster, a very complex part here, made up of 4 distinct parts. Each of these parts must come together and be sealed. The O-rings work by expanding or contracting to fill in where the mechanical joints come together. So depending on the temperature and the pressure, they will seal effectively. It was known that the O-rings did not work perfectly, that there had been some erosion and corrosion, and yet there had never been a failure before, and on all other flights where these O-rings had not worked perfectly, they still achieved their missions. The concern here was that because the temperature was so low, the engineers didn't think that the O-rings would expand enough, and because of that, atmospheric pressure would enter into the space shuttle, which would lead to catastrophe. So is this a management decision or an engineering decision? Who should be the one making the decision here? Most scholars believe that these sorts of strategic decisions should be made by management and not by engineers. Engineers here push to postpone the flight. Management push to keep the flight on schedule. We are all well aware of the impact of management's decision. While everyone wanted to point the blame at somebody, it probably wasn't any one person's fault. The engineers wanted to delay the flight based on a concern that they had. A flight had never been launched at such a low temperature, and they were concerned that the O-rings wouldn't work properly. They had no data to support this. Every other flight with damaged O-rings had gone well. Management was under extreme pressure to launch the flight on time. They were aware of the massive cost in personnel and in equipment, and also in public relations that would incur if the flight didn't launch on time. Ultimately, those concerns that were backed by hard data prevailed over NASA's engineers' concerns. Nonetheless, everyone was extremely well informed, worked extremely hard, and was very aware of the human cost associated with the wrong decision. Unfortunately, the wrong decision was made, but it probably wasn't any one person's fault, but rather you could look at the organization of NASA and the system in which they operated in to blame. To examine that, we need to talk about a concept known as organizational alignment. This is how many different variables of an organization work together, and how they work together to make decisions. Some of these variables are task interdependencies, status relationships, communications inadequacies, performance requirements, rewards. Within these, you have to look at the individuals within the profession, standard operating procedure within the profession, and also outside influences on the profession from stakeholders within it, such as shareholders, venture capitalists, management. The better these variables and factors work together, and the extent to which they make decision-making effective, makes the firm either more or less in alignment. So, did a lack of alignment contribute to the disaster? To answer this question, we need to look at this from a socio-technic perspective. We need to look at the technical side and the social side. The technical side are the tools, the techniques, the equipment, the engineers, the entire technical system. It's explained and understood in terms of physics, chemistry, mathematics, data. The goals are maximization of profit, minimization of cost and time. NASA's technical system operated in a dynamic, uncertain, and unpredictable environment. Because the shuttle itself was constantly being redesigned, it was impossible to predict and simulate all post-launch contingencies. Very little was actually known for certain, just to an almost certainty, and the engineers had to guess. On the other hand, its counterpart is the social system. The people, their values, beliefs, attitudes, emotions. This isn't understood in data, but rather in emotion and psychology. Success is measured here in terms of job satisfaction, achievement, growth, responsibility, and hope. NASA's social system was a classical, rigid, production-oriented bureaucracy. A proliferation of rules governed every aspect of the work process, and engineers complained of being buried in a blizzard of paperwork. There is a strong suggestion that goal displacement was taking place, that the rules were no longer a means to some desirable end, that they seemed to take on lives of their own, becoming ends in themselves and often a means to protect and advance a career. So not only were the technical side and the social side both in shambles, the nature of the social system made it in disalignment with the technical system. The strict bureaucracy and strict adherence to rules at NASA, which was the way most people advanced in their careers, meant that protocol often got in the way of rational decision making. This is not to say that the system was responsible for the failure, just that it's very likely and probably more likely that the NASA system was responsible for the disaster more than any other single individual. And so what does this mean for information technology and information systems? Well, IT guys are engineers too. They fulfill the same roles in their organizations that engineers do. These services they provide are just as vital to their organization's success and failure. They are considered experts and looked to for right answers. They face the same pressures as traditional engineers. One well-known example of an IT disaster is the Obamacare rollout. The IT department was responsible for designing the website. Its effective administration was essential to the program. Information technology engineers undoubtedly pushed to suspend the rollout. Yet the Obama administration, under immense political pressure to meet the deadline, went ahead with it anyways. The result was a catastrophic failure of the Obamacare website. A less noteworthy example is at Loyola Law School. There, responding to scholarship deadlines, changing course schedules, employment statistics, and moving up in the ABA rankings, somehow or another, a large group of students had their social security numbers and class rank leaked to almost their entire class. This had a devastating impact on the prestige and on the future alumni contributions of Loyola Law School. In both cases, the IT department pushed to delay the rollout and to delay the program, yet the administration decided in their risk weighing to go out and do it anyways. Both are highly bureaucratic organizations. The point is that when IT people make mistakes, or when there is an IT disaster, like engineers, like the engineers in NASA, we should not immediately point fingers at a few bad actors, but rather look to examine the system as a whole, for if it is not in alignment, it may be responsible for the decision rather than the people. Hopefully, if we look at it this way, fewer careers will be destroyed and organizations will run more efficiently. Thank you.